Today, Hezbollah fires a rocket targeting Israel's spy agency headquarters near Tel Aviv.
Iran is brokering talks to send advanced Russian missiles to Yemen's Houthis. Our latest poll finds Harris widening her lead over Trump.
And the island nation of Tuvalu is on an existential mission at the UN.
It's Wednesday, September 25th. This is Reuters World News, bringing you everything you need to know from the front lines in 10 minutes every weekday. I'm Jonah Green in New York.
And I'm Carmel Crimmins in Dublin. Warning sirens sound in Tel Aviv as Israeli defense systems shoot down a missile. Lebanon's Hezbollah says it fired the rocket at Mossad's spy agency headquarters near the city. There were no reports of damage or casualties, but the attempted strike deep into Israel marks a new escalation in nearly a year of cross-border clashes. On Tuesday, an Israeli strike in Beirut killed the head of Hezbollah's missile and rocket force. The crisis in the Middle East hangs heavy over this year's meeting of the United Nations General Assembly in New York. The UN Security Council meets later today to discuss the conflict, with UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres warning the situation was at a tipping point.
Lebanon is at the brink. The people of Lebanon, the people of Israel, and the people of the world cannot afford Lebanon to become another Gaza.
Lebanon says only Washington can help end the fighting. In his final address to the UN as president, Joe Biden said a diplomatic solution was still possible.
Almost a year later, too many on each side of the Israeli-Lebanon border remain displaced. A full-scale war is not in anyone's interest.
In his first speech at the UN General Assembly, Iran's new president, Masoud Pezeshkian, said the country did not want to create insecurity for others. But Tehran's deepening ties with Moscow are a source of insecurity for the West.
Iran is brokering secret talks between Russia and the Houthis to supply Yaqant anti-ship missiles to the militant group. Moscow has not decided yet if it will send the missiles, but experts are warning that if a deal goes ahead, it could be a game changer for regional security. The P-800, as they're known, have far more capability than the missiles the Houthis have used since November to attack Western ships in the Red Sea. Jonathan Landay covers national security in Washington. Jonathan, first, what do we know about the talks and this possible weapons deal?
This would be a development that would seriously impact regional security because these missiles fly at supersonic speed, very low to the water, and are very hard to defend against. If the Russians were to transfer these missiles to the Houthis, that would constitute a further escalation of tensions in the region. And that's because of the threat that these missiles pose, not just to commercial shipping, but also to U.S. and Western warships that have been deployed in the Red Sea to protect commercial shipping, as well as the fact that these missiles can be used in a land attack role.
What are you hearing from U.S. officials? How worried are they about the Russians arming the Houthis?
A senior U.S. official tells me that the U.S. is extremely concerned about this, as are the Saudis. Iran has provided suicide drones to Russia, according to U.S., Ukrainian, and other officials, and there is other cooperation going on. The Iranians, as we've reported several weeks ago, have been expanding their missile production capabilities at a time when they and the Russians are increasing this cooperation. And that is another aspect of the relationship that has been worrying U.S. and other officials.
A Houthi spokesman said he had no knowledge about the talks. Neither Iran's UN mission nor the Russian Defense Ministry responded to requests for comment. Vice President Kamala Harris says she backs ending the filibuster to protect the right to an abortion nationally. The filibuster is a procedural tool that currently requires a supermajority in the Senate to pass legislation. The U.S. National Weather Service says Tropical Storm Helene is expected to unleash mudslides and flooding in Cuba before reaching major hurricane strength. It's expected to hit Florida on Thursday.
A Missouri man has been executed even as the prosecutor's office, which secured his murder conviction, expressed doubts about the case. 55-year-old Marcellus Williams was put to death by lethal injection after the Supreme Court declined to step in the hours before his execution. Williams was found guilty of murdering a newspaper reporter who was found stabbed to death in her home 21 years ago.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau looks set to survive a confidence vote later today. A rival party said it would not back an attempt to defeat his minority Liberal government.
Volkswagen kicks off high-stakes pay talks with unions in Germany today. Tensions are running high because Europe's top car maker is considering closing factories in its home market for the first time. Volkswagen says that high energy and labour costs in Germany put it at a disadvantage to European peers, as well as Chinese rivals. But union officials have vowed to fight any plant closures. And the car industry features prominently in the latest episode of my podcast, Reuters Econ World. It's out later today and looks at predictions for peak oil and what that means for the energy industry and the planet. You can catch it on Reuters.com, the Reuters app, or wherever you get your podcast.
The latest Reuters Ipsos poll finds Vice President Kamala Harris leading former President Donald Trump 47-40. Harris also appears to have softened Trump's edge on the economy and jobs. Scott Malone is our politics editor. So, Scott, obviously this is a good number for Harris, but what is the value, apart from emotional, of a national poll? You know, we know so much of this election really comes down to a few thousand votes here and there in Pennsylvania, Georgia, Wisconsin.
This does provide, a barometer of the national mood, but it is true that this is a state-by-state system. Election's going to be decided in 7 highly competitive states. And public polling in those states also shows very close races. And recent history shows that you can win the Electoral College without winning a majority of the national popular vote, as Donald Trump did in 2016 and George W. Bush did in the year 2000.
The numbers do show some positive developments for Harris in terms of her economic messaging.
That's right. And this was an interesting finding. Historically, in general, the public tends to view Republicans as being stronger on the economy. And broadly over the past year, 18 months or so, that had been true of first the Trump-Biden matchup and then Trump-Harris. But this poll found Trump with a very small lead, 43% to 41%. And that's the second month in a row that we've seen kind of that gap closing. Earlier in the year, he'd had a substantially wider lead. Back in August, our poll gave him a 11-point advantage on the economy. And that does suggest that Harris's messaging on the economy is breaking through and persuading voters.
Returning to the UN General Assembly now, and the island nation of Tuvalu is on a unique diplomatic mission. It's asking UN members to support its push to have its existence as a sovereign state legally recognised, even after it disappears beneath the waves. Kirsty Needham has been in Tuvalu recently and joins us ahead of today's meeting in New York.
For Tuvalu, time is running out. They have a very clear timeline of when their population will need to move, and they really want to lock down this issue of sovereignty and the legal issues that surround sea level rise for small island states that see it as an existential threat.
Just how bad is the threat of rising sea levels in Tuvalu?
Tuvalu is 20 metres wide at its narrowest, 400 metres wide at its widest. There's nowhere to go when the king tides and the high tides roll in. So the